Welcome back to another episode of The Word. Where I don't wanna jinx it. We're starting to get a little bit of a cadence here.
He's heating up. Is it the shoes?
Get a little bit of a cadence here. James Mundia alongside my co-host Richard Bruce Silver Abernathy. We've got with the world of sports at a standstill here, our episode structure has been changing a little bit. That being said, there were some developments in the sports world that I was actually kind of surprised at. I will say I was surprised to find out this week that the German Bundesliga is returning somehow. I don't know how that's going to happen or where they're going to. I guess they're playing in front of no fans, etc. But also on the domestic side of things, we talked about in the green room, there's a little bit of movement on that end as well.
Yeah, there was some good NBA or potentially good NBA news earlier in the week. There's a big call with a bunch of players and Michelle Roberts, the head of the Players Association. And, I mean, it's all just sort of talk at this point, but when you hear words like there's momentum towards returning the season and things are starting to skew that direction, as that was certainly a positive change because it seemed like over the last week to 10 days, things had sort of stalled out and there wasn't a lot of news, and some of the reports that have come out actually made me a little worried that there wouldn't be a resumption of the season. Obviously, it's still very touch and go, and it can change at any time. But at least it did seem like there was some positive steps forward this weekend that the players want to play. Obviously, they have a huge financial interest. So do the owners. So do the television partners and the other league corporate sponsors. So we'll see what happens. And obviously, we want everyone to be safe, and we don't want it to come back at the expense of player health. But it was at least positive news that it seems like the NBA is inching closer towards a return.
Yeah, I was kind of surprised to see things move forward that quickly. But I guess what that really means is, or not that quickly, but to me, it was out of the blue. But what it means is that there's been a lot of work being done behind the scenes to see if this is really possible. I guess that's what kind of everybody's having to do right now, not just in the sports world, but looking at, okay, where do you go from here? And I find that pretty interesting.
Yeah, the one concern for me is that it seems like the sort of bubble plan has not been overly popular with some of the owners, at least. And I just don't know how feasible it's going to be for them to play games. And I mean, even just for playoff teams, just 16 different cities. I just don't know that that's really going to be feasible from a health standpoint. And it seemed like trying to do it at Disney World or Vegas or somewhere where they could kind of create a bubble, although they've sort of started calling it a campus, which I guess has a friendlier ring to it than bubble.
Yeah.
But finding a safe place for all the players and the various staff, and I mean, we've talked about it before, that you quickly realize how many people it takes to put on an NBA game. And I mean, just with 100% necessary personnel on the teams before you even get into arena staff or referees or people working the table or camera crews, all that type of stuff. I mean, it adds up really quickly. So I just don't know how realistic it is to have, 12, 14, 16 different cities where they're playing games.
Yeah.
And it does seem like they're going to need to at least come back for a couple regular season games. And I think there's a couple reasons for that. One, obviously, is you can't just jump to the playoffs when guys haven't played a meaningful basketball game in 3 months. That they're going to need some sort of tune-up. And there's also with the regional sports networks where all the teams have contracts with a regional network to air their home games when they're not on national TV. And I heard something last week about if there's like a 70-game threshold to meet the contracts with the regional service providers. And if they don't get to 70, then that causes some financial issues for the teams and the networks both. Um, we were pretty close to the 70 game mark anyway when this shut down, because we were right at about a month left in the season. So it's certainly possible that they jump straight to the playoffs, but I think that's sort of a worst case scenario if they have to push this to the very end of whatever their window is, which seemed like it would be, early July. They would need to start games to make this happen and not affect next season. So we'll see what comes forth in the next couple of weeks. It seems like we might start to know a little bit more now that states are starting to open up a little bit. But the real question for me, and I'm curious what your take is, what happens if one of these guys were in the second round of the playoffs, we just finished game 2, and all of a sudden you find out, a player on the Rockets tested positive?
Yeah, and this is every time that I with domestic leagues, I've been thinking about this a lot because it happened. That's how we got shut down in the first place, or the league got shut down. Every time I think about this scenario of, expediting a restart or going to the playoffs, what happens at that point? And what seems clear to me, and I know we said in the rundown and in the green room that we're not going to get political on it because we've been doing that a lot lately. But I mean, it's hard not to. But it seems like to me that the overwhelming, the consensus, or at least part of the discussion, is that people are going to try to work around it. I don't know what else to say. I don't necessarily agree with that, but I don't know how. I mean, if there's all this work being put into getting people back on the court and satisfying some of these agreements you have with staff, players, owners, television networks, sponsorships, I don't know. I've talked about it a lot in some of the Zoom calls that I have on Fridays with my old neighbors in Atlanta. And we talk about when sports are going to come back. And a buddy of mine always brings me back to the fact that, this is it's a public health thing, first and foremost. But I think the fact that we're talking about getting people back on the court, I don't know. I think it means that they're going to find a way to work around it. I don't know what that means. I was shocked to see that some of the Premier League teams are getting back into training. And not only that, now the Bundesliga, like I said, the German Premier League essentially is going to be restarting games soon.
Well, they seem to have a pretty good handle on it in Germany.
Nationally, and I think, and that's what's prompted them to feel confident about that.
To me, if a player tests positive, it's probably symptomatic of a larger issue at that point, because if they're testing guys and everybody has to be, clean bill of health to even get into the bubble, if someone tests positive, it either means they're not obeying the rules that are set forth or the restrictions or what have you, or it just means that it's infiltrated that bubble or that campus, whatever word you decide you want to use. And it's not just going to affect one team at that point. And, if a player for Team A tests positive, well, they played Team B that night and they played Team C the night before, or what have you. I mean, depending on where it comes in the playoffs or in the lead up to the playoffs, if they do play regular season games. So I just don't know what they're going to do. I mean, is it worse to not come back than to, in the middle of round 2, they just call it?
But they're not. I don't think they would call it in the middle of round 2. That's what I'm saying.
But if 2 or 3 teams have players test positive and they have to wait 2 weeks, do you just say, well, too bad, Houston, James Harden can't play? Or is the whole team sidelined since they were exposed to him? Or do they have to just be tested, and if they test positive, they can play, and if not, they can't? I just don't know what the rules are going to be. It just seems like it's just ripe for one of those situations to come right in the middle of it and just screw everything up once they get started back.
Here's the way I'm going to put it. Because what I see here is I see the desire to get a championship. We'll talk about Last Dance later, and then some of the things that we've seen in the competitive nature of the NBA. I don't think. I mean, you'd have to make testing a daily mandatory practice by an outside observer.
Yeah,
You
and
can't
that
have
comes with its own political issues also.
Exactly.
You don't want to be seen as we're being greedy, we're trying to make money, so we're taking tests that maybe need to be available for more of a public use. So I do really want to see if they can find a way to make this bubble thing work, though. Just even from the get-go, just to get people to buy into that, because I think it's such an interesting concept and a way to do it, where you do it almost like summer league, where you just have all these teams together. You're playing in practice facilities or like a bigger facility where there's 2 or 3 different courts. Depending on what they do with the broadcast, we could hear an amazing amount of shit talk between these guys, which if we've learned anything from the Last Dance is that the playoffs is full of people just chirping at each other the whole time.
Yeah.
And I do think that it could be, I mean, granted, we're starved for sports to the point that we're trying to watch Korean League baseball at 3:30 in the morning. Well, some people, and by some people I mean me, trying to watch Korean baseball at 3:30 in the morning.
Yeah.
That it would be great to have the sport back. But sort of like what I said last week on the show, I've caught myself a couple times feeling that maybe I'm being selfish, hoping that it comes back, and we really should be worried about health and safety first. And I don't think the league would come back if there was a question about that, but there's no guarantee. As we've seen in the White House this week, sometime one day you test negative and the next day you test positive sometimes. That's sort of how testing works.
Yeah, settle down. Well, that's the thing to me is it's like what you just have to. Okay, you know what? No, I'm gonna throw a lukewarm take in here. There has to be a certain level of acceptance at some point, and by that I mean nobody is rooting for this to not work, but there's so many unknowns. I'll put it to you like this, and I said this to a friend of mine the other day. We were hanging out, and I said the most frustrating thing about all of this on a personal level, because there's things that have happened that are way more serious than whatever I've had to deal with, is how sometimes you're having a conversation with someone, maybe even a colleague at work, and it kind of seems like the goalposts keep getting moved and the reality keeps getting shifted. And you're like, hey, what's going on here? Wait, yesterday you said this. Okay, now we're doing this. Okay, so was that a big deal? What I'm really having a hard time dealing with as someone who's, again, not personally affected by this in a way that would make me qualified to complain. Just as an observer, I'm looking at it and I'm saying, can somebody just tell me what the hell's going on? And because like we're talking about right now on the show, we might have NBA games and playoff games happening. But at the same time, there's all these other things going on in my state, in the country, in the world. And it's a little bit weird for me to try to reconcile everything. And then also my own personal opinions come in, and the opinions of my friends and people that I trust, family. So when I look at this whole thing of, okay, we're gonna try to get games going back again, to me that signals a real overwhelming sense of confidence that we're past the major issues. Okay, good. Do we have a consensus on that? Because I also am starting to hear things like people aren't going back to school in the fall. There's corporate notices going out. I received a notice from my corporate overlord about when I'm supposed to be going back into the office. That was a surprising estimate to me, and so that's to me why I find this all very silly. That there's a little bit of hubris involved here, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. Yeah, we're gonna have playoff games. Oh, okay, yeah, you're gonna have playoff games, and like Rich, you just said, then if somebody gets sick, then what do we do? That's where I'm so confused.
Right, I mean, but here's the thing I'll say. I agree that there is a little bit of incongruity, or it wouldn't really necessarily match up if, okay, we can play playoff games and we can do all these things, but I can't go back to work. And I can see how, from an optics standpoint, that may be frustrating for some people, and that may cause some people to get upset. It's like, well, these NBA players can go play and make their millions of dollars, but I can't go back to my job, or the restaurant where I work isn't open, whatever the case may be. And I get that. In a weird way, what would be a real just gangster move for the NBA to do, or one of these leagues to do, and I'm not necessarily advocating for it because it could be problematic and it's not necessarily the best way to handle this. But I would respect them if they went to a state, let's say they want to do it at Disney World, and they go to Florida and they say, look, we want to come bring all the NBA teams, have all the playoffs in your state. Players are going to be staying in hotels. We're going to spend hundreds of millions of dollars over the course of the next 2 months in your state. But for us to do that, you have to limit your reopening, or you have to be careful about how you do these things. Great. It would be problematic if all of a sudden a professional sports league was helping dictate public health policy. I get it. But I would kind of be impressed that somebody would have the stones to make that stance. But in a way, it's really not that different than what some other companies do with, hey, we'll come build our plan to bring our jobs here, but we need this as a tax break, or we need that.
Yeah. So
in that sense, I mean, they're doing it with good intentions, so it makes it a little different.
Yeah.
But I would just be floored if a league were to do that. And if there was a league that would have that sort of foresight or that sort of social consciousness, I think it would be the NBA, to come up with that idea and say, look, we'll come, but we need to feel good about putting our people there. And if everybody's out running around all the time, then we don't feel good doing that.
But then you know what's going to happen right after that, my boy. You know what that press conference is going to be like in the Rose Garden, my dude. You know.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I do know.
And this is why I'm so confused. And again, I'm starting to reach an equilibrium where I'm getting a little bit better at just managing my emotions about all this stuff. But that would definitely be a tough one, where I'd be like, oh gosh, now we got Trump going after David Silver and
Adam Silver.
I'm sorry, Adam Silver, and so. But again, that's hypothetical. Yeah. But I understand.
Hypothetical. It's a tricky one. I'm just saying I would kind of be impressed by the stones it would take to make that request.
Yeah, agreed. Well, yeah, I again, and like I said, this just to wrap up my lukewarm take. I mean, I because I don't have because I can't, because the conversation I had just a few hours ago with a friend of mine. Because I don't know what sources to trust, who to believe about what's going on, I can't have an opinion about whether it does make sense for the leagues to start trying to play again. And that's
sort of the crux of the problem, right?
Well, yes, and this is where I don't know who. I don't know if Dan Rather has to come back and just start, because his Twitter, he's popping off on his Twitter, and I'm like, all right, Dan, but someone needs to come back and be like, yo, did you guys forget what news is? Because Dan Rather in a half-hour news broadcast with the 22 minutes with commercials, he kind of settled into a pretty good rhythm of this is what happened. And right now it's all about well, this is how I feel. This is how I feel about this. Well, this is a travesty. Oh, okay. Can you just tell me if I need to wear a mask or not? Because and that's not just for the news media. That's also for the people running the show. From the top down, from the White House down. Do I need to wear a mask? We're having this whole thing in Texas right now. Governor Abbott comes out. No, we don't need masks. Oh, no one needs a mask? I thought that was something that the CDC was saying could be. This is what I mean. And to a certain degree, I am just trying to learn to accept it and be one with it, because it's going to drive me nuts otherwise. And because I just, again, we can't answer small questions like that. What about larger questions when do leagues open? When do businesses reopen? Bars and restaurants. Anyway, it's So
Well, at a certain level, there's only so much we can know right now because it is a novel virus. This is not something that, I mean, people have expectations or have predictions or follow the models or whatever it may be, and those things change. And it doesn't necessarily mean people are wrong. You're having to make a guess, and you're having to predict what certain steps, what effect they'll have on the outcome. And sometimes it's hard to know that for sure. My bigger problem has just been the messaging and people not being on the same page and contradictory information. And I mean, the fact that there are federal guidelines for reopening and different states aren't necessarily meeting the benchmarks and they're reopening anyway, just that, it's like, okay, well, what am I supposed to believe? And that's been the frustrating thing. And a certain amount of it is unavoidable, but we've also made things harder on ourselves the way things have been, information's gotten out there, and the way things have been not necessarily reported, but shared with the general public, is that it's hard to kind of know exactly what to do. So I feel your frustration, but hopefully we're getting closer to the light at the end of the tunnel. Although I want to say it was in The Last Dance where they said if you see a light at the end of the tunnel, that means the train's coming. So
yeah, there we go. Yeah.
But hopefully things continue to trend the right direction. And to me, having sports back just means that other things are probably going better, or at least that's my hope. And just because I don't think there's a way for them to come back on that large a scale, even if it is in one location, that I don't think that they would be able to come back or would come back if things had really deteriorated other places. So to me, so the NBA coming back or Major League Baseball starting or even a sport that I couldn't give two shits about like the MLS, if they're back and playing games, then it means that we're making progress in this whole thing. So sort of the canary in the coal mine for COVID-19. So hopefully we can get there soon.
Yeah.
All right. Well, moving off of coronavirus, and before we get into the bulk of the show this week, where we're going to break down The Last Dance, we have a new sponsor this week.
This is exciting.
We're very excited about this partnership. Hopefully, we'll be able to get out to take advantage of this sometime soon. But Hammond Helicopter Tours is our sponsor this week. James, have you ever been looking to arrive in style for a bachelor party in paradise? Or have you ever needed to escape after a stressful day at the office?
Yeah.
Well, call Hammond Helicopter Tours for all your tropical transportation needs. Listen, at the drop of a hat, these guys will come and pick you up. You could be being chased by a T-Rex, and these guys will swoop in and scoop you. The old swoop and scoop. And we all make our plans. Plans sometimes go awry. Call that Uber, it never shows up. Sometimes you have to adjust on the fly. And that's where Hammond Helicopter Tours come in. Because life finds a way.
Well, I'm excited about this new sponsorship, and I think it's a great product. We've used it before ourselves. We can both attest to it. And
I thought we weren't going to talk about that weekend.
Okay. Well, I mean, it's off the record. I'll redact it.
Stricken. It's stricken from the record.
I have to say that I am so happy that ESPN decided to release The Last Dance early.
You are not alone, my friend.
It's so good, and I forgot how epic the Bulls were, which is kind of strange to think about because we grew up with that team winning everything and with Michael Jordan and all the drama around it. It's just such an amazing testament to the power of sports, but also good sports journalism and documentaries.
Yeah, it's been great to see and to relive a lot of that. Most of that first run I remember in the early 90s, and I definitely remember the second three-peat because I was in full-fledged sports nerd mode by that point. And it's just cool to go back and remember some things that I'd forgotten about or learn some things that I never knew in the first place. A bunch of the behind-the-scenes footage has been great, and you really get a glimpse into, especially in last week's pair of episodes, the just competitive streak that Jordan had and his ability to manufacture or in certain cases just completely make up things to motivate himself.
Yeah.
And it's been really cool to dive in and get that full picture. And I've loved it, but it does beg one question for me. I mean, the ratings have been through the roof on this for ESPN. I think they got around 5 million, a little over 5 million for the first episode last week and a little under on the second one,
Mm-hmm.
which is for ESPN or really any cable network. I mean, 5 million people is a huge rating, and it's dominated the conversation. And I know it was originally going to air in more of a dead time in the schedule. It was originally supposed to come out after, I believe, after the finals in June, and they moved it
Right.
up because of all this. But I'm curious how the reception of the doc would be different, or maybe not the reception, but the conversation around it would be different if it wasn't kind of the only game in town.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I maybe have mentioned, I don't think I've mentioned this on the last Stream Team episode, but one of the things that I've really loved about some of the entertainment entities, what they've been doing is modifying their schedules to reflect the realities of what's going on in the world right now, because a lot of people are stuck inside, or at least can't go outside as much as they would like to. And so, for instance, for me, I'm hooked on all these TLC reality shows. And before the 90 Days is 90 Day Fiance spinoff. And what they actually do is they've completely modified their shows, not their show structure, but their schedule to a certain degree, where they'll be airing, kind of like longer episodes, like a little bit earlier than they normally would. And they're also like kind of sprinkling in these like bonus episodes that are relatively the same episode as the week before, but with like a little bit of bonus material. And I really appreciate that, because I think it kind of reflects the fact that people are sort of like, oh man, if I could just have like another hour of that show, even if it's like kind of a recap, it'd just be nice to do something new. And so with the Last Dance, I think that they're just kind of taking advantage of what is going on in the world right now. And I agree, it would be quite different if they had to do the typical, maybe one episode a week for 10 weeks on Sunday nights after the finals are done. Instead, it's sort of like, I mean, now, I texted you about this a couple of days ago. It's like, I think it's the only thing that I really have is appointment viewing right now, because there's nothing else on. So it's like, of course.
And that's been the big thing during all this, is we've lost that communal aspect of watching, whether it's sports or a TV show that everybody's watching and we're all kind of reacting to it in real time. It's the immediate part of the conversation. If you're not watching it, you're missing out.
Yeah.
I mean, the closest thing we had before The Last Dance, I think, was Tiger King, where it was just one of those things where everybody was watching it and everybody had their thoughts and opinions. And especially on Twitter, if you hadn't seen it, you didn't get the memes, you were left out of the conversation, all those types of things. And that's one of the great things about sports, is that it's sort of the ultimate reality TV. And you have to watch it live. And for as many times as I've had to miss part of a game, and all right, I'm just going to tape it. I'm not going to check the score. I'm just going to go home and watch it. I've never once been able to do that. I've always given up and checked it on my phone before I got home to see what the score is. And it's just one of those things that it's hard to miss the moment. You don't want to be left out. You don't want to not know what's going on, whether it's your team or not. And The Last Dance has been the closest we've had to that in a couple of months.
Yeah.
And it's certainly not that it wouldn't have been well received, and the numbers and total views might not have been what they currently are if it was aired in June in an alternate universe. But it's sort of been the Twitter topic on Sunday night and most of Monday.
Yeah.
And it's been great to kind of have that back, whether it's, playoff games or football games or whatever's going on there. It seems like there's always something like that where you have to kind of feel plugged in. You need to watch it, and we just haven't had that. So it's been cool to have that back. And what a great series to have that sort of be our focal point over the last couple of Sundays.
Oh, it's so good. I will say that. So there's a couple things that stand out to me that have really made it kind of really special to me is, we both went to UNC and so did Jordan, and I love the old school footage of him at Carolina. He's a kid, and it makes Jordan humanizes him so much more because he was this icon forever. He still is, and I love seeing that footage of him back on campus.
Where he's riding a bike around.
Riding a bike with Buzz Peterson. I mean, it's just like so wholesome. And then the locker room footage, I also really like. Again, it's a side of him that I don't think that we really ever got to see before. I mean, even as a kid, I remember thinking like, this guy he's like a professional. He's always very polished, and you see him in the locker room, and he's just one of the guys. And even in the part of the series where he's playing baseball, the kind of the camaraderie he had with those guys, and being able to see that I don't think had been seen before, or at least that footage itself. And then there's other little outliers. The one that stands out to me is being able to. I know they did a 30 for 30 on Dennis Rodman, but I watched it on mute at a bar. I didn't hear the audio, but being able to see a little bit more about what his impact was and who he is as a person, it brings it all together for me, because he was always the one part of it that I was always a little bit confused about it as the dynasty. It was like, what is this guy all about? I mean, yeah, we know he's a rebounder and he's a kind of a bad boy, but those three things to me really stand out. And again, it brings such a much more human element to this highly commercialized, highly marketed thing of an NBA dynasty. And it's like, it made it it's so much more enjoyable now. We went through that as kids watching it grow up when we were growing up, but now we get to see it as adults and say like, oh wow, like there's a real human aspect to it. I think it's really great.
Yeah, it was cool seeing some. I mean, I know they got trounced in the series 4-1, but as a guy who grew up a Hornets fan, it was cool to see some old purple and teal in the episode this past week. Even though apparently B.J. Armstrong should have kept his mouth shut, but he's been great to hear from. He's been a really good interview, I thought, throughout. But a couple other the things that I really enjoyed watching the first 8 parts. MJ crying after just collapsing in the locker room after they beat the Sonics in '96.
Yeah.
His first title after his dad passed. And I've seen that footage before. Like, I've seen the clip, but I've never heard the audio.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
Of him just sobbing. And it was gut-wrenching watching it.
Yes. Yes.
And I almost had to kind of look away from the TV because it felt like that was really the first time in the series I was like, okay, I feel like maybe we shouldn't be here for this. And of all the things that I've loved, I will say that I've been just a little disappointed in some of the behind the scenes stuff. We've got more of it the last couple of weeks, but I wanted to see more of the teammates interacting with Jordan or stuff on the bus and in the locker room and things like just the type of stuff that has just never been seen. But that moment alone made up for a lot of that for me, just because it was so incredibly powerful. In addition to the way they ended episode 7, where he started getting emotional, talking about what it took to win and his mindset. And when he just says break and gets up out of the chair, it was just incredibly powerful. And I just think it's been really well done throughout. I also love the security guard that was throwing quarters with Jordan and took money off of him. Because how many people is that a lifelong dream to just be able to talk shit to MJ's face and know that there's nothing he can do about it?
He got so mad.
He was so mad. He was like LeBradford Smith levels of mad at the security guard. And I'm sure what wasn't on camera was that he made sure to kick that guy's ass like the next 20 times they did that and take his money. But I mean, that guy had such an awesome. He looks like Hubie Brown's nephew with that hair. And it's just phenomenal. I'm so glad that we've been able to be introduced to that guy. And the other thing I've loved, and they made a pattern of it a little bit throughout the series, is handing MJ the iPad to see what other people are saying about him and react.
Oh my God. That's the greatest meme on Twitter right now is him like looking at the iPad.
It's so, and there's been like 3 or 4 of those, and they've all been incredible. And I've interviewed lots of people over the years for different productions and different things that I've been working on. And a few times I've used the gimmick of, hey, here's what someone said, or hey, we've got this moment and we want to get you to react. But every time I've done it, it's sort of been a sort of benign, vanilla response of, oh, that's so cool. It's just kind of nice. MJ is just throwing heat right back and just taking shots at guys. And I mean, this past week with Gary Payton, where he's just laughing openly at his assertions that he had given him trouble. And it's just been phenomenal, more than I could have ever expected. In fact, Jordan in general in his interviews have been great.
Yeah.
And he's been really insightful. And I mean, we're getting his version on some things, and there's some aspects of his life and his career that have not been a part of it, for a variety of reasons, I'm sure. But I feel like he's really gotten into some stuff that I wasn't sure he was going to get into.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a little bit of a tightrope to walk there because, they need him to sign off on it to use it.
Mm-hmm.
And for someone who's really that prominently involved in a documentary that focuses on them, you always wonder and worry a little bit about exactly how they're exerting that influence and how that's affecting the story. But I don't think that, other than maybe just some personal family stuff, I don't think he shied away from that much. And, I don't necessarily believe or agree with some of the things he said, especially about the Dream Team stuff with Isaiah. But I mean, he's gotten into the gambling thing a pretty decent amount. And he's talked about his confrontations with teammates. I mean, the fact that he punched Steve Kerr, I mean, that's a great story. And I'd heard that story before. Yeah. But to see, Steve talk about it, to see MJ talk about it, and then him basically followed up by saying, I trusted and believed in Steve after that because he didn't back down. He stepped up to me, and that made me respect him more. Yeah. And, there's certainly some of the things that he's done as a teammate that when other people do them, we don't necessarily give them a pass. And I'll get to that a little more later on, and when we get to sort of the winners and losers of this to this point. But it is interesting to see MJ kind of, I don't want to say rationalize, even though that's kind of what he's doing, but he's explaining his methodology and the way he went about leading. And in a lot of ways, it's fascinating to me because I just don't think star players can lead like that anymore.
Absolutely not.
For a number of different reasons. I mean, for none other than all these guys are making so much money. Then you say, well, get out of my face. I don't care. Who are you to tell me what to do? And it's just a sort of a different era now with social media and everything else. I just don't think that would necessarily fly. So I've been just captivated by some of those teammate interactions and how he and they have, thought about it over the years and how it's, they haven't necessarily had the reaction to it in current day that I thought they might, even though, I mean, Will Perdue said it straight up, like, yeah, he was an asshole, but there's a reason why. And he was a good teammate and we respected him and we get it.
I told a friend of mine, I believe, I don't think I said it on the show, but I told a friend of mine, even after the first 2 episodes, I'm out of the coaching world. I used to coach, youth soccer primarily and did a little bit of high school basketball for a little bit. But the first 2 episodes, I was like, you know what? Never mind. I'm back in. Like, I want to be back in the arena because this is so much fun. Then I realized though, now after watching the last 2 episodes, I realized one of the reasons why I feel comfortable distancing myself from that is that mentality of let's do what it takes to win. And it doesn't mean we're not always going to be friends with each other. We're not always going to be lovey-dovey. That is not acceptable anymore. It's become it's a different management style, managing, players, but also managing teammates. And again, there's a wrong way and a right way to do it. But what stands out to me is it can be done. And I think Jordan proved that, because maybe it's because they're playing for the cameras, but I don't think Steve Kerr is going to just he's a coach now. He's not going to just say what needs to be said to look good. And, he's a coach now, and he gets into his players and he wants them to do the best they can. He understood that, if Jordan's going to come at me like this, I'm going to go back at him, but we're going to be better for it. And, look, it was so funny that they had a little segment. I don't know if it was a playoff game where Will Perdue had this reverse dunk, and one of the announcers was like, "Where did that come from?" And it was during this part where they were talking about how Jordan made everybody better. And I was like, damn, I don't remember Will Perdue hitting dunks like that when I watched him play. But again, they obviously needed those points. You take everything you can get. And so I look at it, and that's again why I feel so comfortable taking some time away from being so involved with sports, because I guess I'm just nostalgic for that sort of attitude. I think that I was that type of player in some of the teams that I played on. I certainly kind of felt like, what are we here for if we're not going to go for it? I'm going to go at you pretty hard in practice. I'm not going to try to hurt you, but this is practice.
That's why I quit your intramural soccer team, because of your intensity. No, but you brought up coaching. It's been cool to see how Phil kind of pushed some of those buttons, and different players talking about it. Rodman especially, or just the way he dealt with him. And I guess he was known as a Zen master for good reason, because he really does know when to push guys and challenge guys, and when to back off and give them space or let them do their thing. Or, I know there's one clip where Jordan was out playing golf, and he was like, "See, that's what's great about Phil. A young coach, we'd be having practice right now. Phil knows we need to get away. He gets it."
Yep.
And so it's been cool to be reminded of just how, he was not only a very good strategic mind and embracing the triangle and his different on-court philosophies, but just the player management and managing the personalities. So much of being a successful coach, especially at that level, is about the people, not necessarily the strategy.
Absolutely. I've loved the coaching bits. And Sacred Hoops and 11 Rings, which are books that Phil has been involved with about coaching, are just phenomenal books they're books about management. It's not about basketball. It's fantastic. Now, before we wrap up the Last Dance and the episode, I do want to make sure that we give a shout out to one of our other new sponsors. This has been a watershed week for sponsorships.
Listen, I don't know. Marcus and the biz dev department have been really putting in the hours the last couple of weeks.
Our intern Marcus has been doing a phenomenal job. We landed a great sponsor, and in a company that I think is relevant during these kind of trying times, and it's Sarah Connor's Canned Goods. Listen, are you preparing for the apocalypse? Look, we all are. We don't know what's going to happen next, or maybe you're just going camping in a socially distant way. Either way, Sarah Connor's Canned Goods are what you need in your stockpile. I've seen the future. These delicious stores of all-natural, organic fruits and vegetables will be sure to terminate your hunger. Once again, that's Sarah Connor's Canned Goods. Shout out to them for sponsoring the broadcast. And now let's return back to our regularly scheduled program.
Speaking of time traveling.
Oh, yeah.
What's your take on the sort of the timeline of the documentary? Because I've seen, I don't want to say pushback or blowback, But I've certainly talked to people that are in my various circles that haven't been huge fans of it, especially at certain points. Um, some of that seems to have quieted down as people have gotten used to it. But what's your take on the narrative structure and flashing back to tell these different stories aside from that '98 season?
It's so funny. I know that we've had this actually in our rundown for a few weeks now, and so we were going to talk about it last week, and we kind of pushed it to this week. And I'm so glad that you brought it up because when I first watched episodes 1 and 2, I was like, oh, okay, this is not my favorite thing, and then I realized what they're actually doing is brilliant. And here's why I feel that way. I, as you know, am a big Patriots fan, Tom Brady fan, and there's a video that I watched a few months ago that was kind of one of these ad hoc compilation clips about Brady's ascension to whoever he is, and it started at the very end of his last Super Bowl run. And it essentially went backwards and forwards, backwards and forwards, backwards and forwards. And I was like, why are they doing this? But to know about what happens at the end, you need to be reminded about what happens at the end, but also what brought you there. So in the first 2 episodes, I was like, oh, I don't know. I don't really care. But then you start to get the context. You start to realize where people came from. I mean, honestly, who's going to go out and seek out information about where Scottie Pippen came from and who he is as a player? We've just grown up and known Scottie Pippen was Jordan's right-hand man. But going back and learning that this guy was a big prospect, of a talented guy, same with Dennis Rodman. Even going back into, now I knew about Phil Jackson's past because I've read his books, but that stuff is really important. And so I like it. And especially now, as you can see, what they're doing is now that you go closer and closer to the end of the '98 finals, now it's sort of like, oh man, like, okay, we know we're getting close. I really want to see, like, what are they going to flash back to here? What are they leading up to? So I like it. I think the reason the people complaining about it and having an issue with it, to me, it just signals again that this is not the type of content that we normally watch now. It goes back to your point about ratings. This might be a little bit of a different draw if it wasn't the only game in town because of the fact that you have to be patient. But that's what documentaries are. It's not a 10-minute YouTube clip. It's these guys. This was a whole year long, multiple year of filming, but also they've been holding on to this footage and cultivating it and interviews. So to me, I love the flashbacks.
I think they've been great. In addition to providing needed context, the way they've weaved in and out of those stories, I think, has been masterful. Um, dealing with the All-Star game in '98 and flashing back from that, just the way they've sequenced and just sort of made some of these transitions seamless has been awesome to me. And some of the negative things I've heard about the narrative structure have actually come from fellow production people that I know, that this is very much in their wheelhouse, which is maybe why they have some different opinions about it, just as filmmakers, as producers, as people who do this for a living, that have maybe had a few minor critiques about the way they've done it. But I think it's been great. And I think it's been easy. I don't think it's been hard to follow, because typically when they go back, so we'll go from '98 back to '91, and then they'll stay pretty linear up to a point moving forward. And then when they kind of get done to that section, it jumps back to '98. It's not like just skipping around. It's, we're going to reset, and then we're going to go forward, and then we'll get back to where we are in air quotes present day in '98. So I've loved it. It's just been a cool way to experience this whole story and be, again, reminded of some things that maybe I'd forgotten about. And I certainly learned some things about some of these guys that I didn't know.
Yeah.
Because I knew generally about Phil's past. Obviously knew he played for the Knicks and was on those title teams and all that. But seeing the film of him coaching overseas.
Right. I had no idea he did that. Yeah.
And all these things, it's been great to kind of see the growth and for the Pippen episode especially, I feel like getting into his past and where he came from and the route that he took to get to the NBA made you kind of understand why he felt the way about his contract that he did.
Yeah.
Because you saw the circumstances where he grew up and the fact that he needed to take care of his family, that his dad and brother were both in a wheelchair. And you kind of get, okay, I understand why this is important to him and its context for why he signed the deal in the first place and all those types of things. So I've really enjoyed it, and I'm glad they've done it that way. And there's really no way to do the 98 story without getting into the background. And there's really no other way to give the background than to sort of dip in and out, because you can't just, all right, we're doing 10 parts on the Bulls, but the first 4 parts only get us to 93. Like, that's just not going to fly to do it in a purely narrative, linear structure. So I've loved it. I am curious to see what's left, because we're obviously through the 8th part. There's 2 episodes left. We know they've got to get to the 97 title and 98 both against Utah. So I'm curious to see how much more dipping into the past there is, because I feel like there's a lot to cover in those 2 seasons. And, much like a season of Game of Thrones or a bunch of shows where it seems like the big sort of climax seems to happen in that next to last episode. And then the last is sort of spinning forward and what's to come. So I'm curious to see at what point in that 9th or 10th episode they get to that 98 title, and if there's any sort of, epilogue to after an update where people are now or what people are doing or contextualizing everything, or if they're going to get to the 98 title with like 10 minutes to go and then just kind of put a bow on it. And not that that's necessarily not the right way to do it. I'm just curious to see how they approach telling that story and how much of it comes after the 98 title, or if that's pretty much at the very end.
Yeah. I'm looking forward to it. I hope that they're longer episodes. I don't know if they're going to be able to pull that off. I guess I could tell by looking at what the projected DVR thing is. They tell us like how long the episodes are supposed to be. But yeah, I've really enjoyed it. I just, it's made me really, I think you and I talked offline a couple weeks ago, and I said, I don't really miss sports, but this has made me really miss, especially playoff basketball. I have a lot of my best memories, like as a sports fan, with playoff basketball, because I never watched playoff basketball by myself. Right? You always go to someone's house. When I was a kid, we watched it all as a family because it was NBC, NBA and NBC, and so the whole family would watch. And they would turn up the microphone when Jordan would take a 3-pointer, and it would just be like, it was that great sound effect. And then, living in Atlanta the last couple of years, even though the Hawks never made the playoffs when I was there, but, we watched the playoffs together, and, it makes me really miss it. And even just NBA regular season. I've always been a big fan of the NBA regular season. I know it's like people it's easy to knock on it, but I'm like, as we've talked about in the show many times, there's still really amazing basketball being played. These are unbelievable athletes. They're playing multiple nights in a row, flying across the country. So I'm looking forward to the last 2 episodes, though.
What do you think's been missing so far? Has there been anyone you haven't heard from, or any stories they haven't told, or aspects of the story that we've covered that maybe they didn't go as deep as you thought they would? What to you have you been wanting more of, or did you feel was maybe left out that you wanted to see?
I don't think that there's much missing that to me that I would say, like, I want to know more about that. I mean, because you can't cover everything. I will say there's one thing that they've done too much of. And again, it's because I did do some reading on this years ago when I was kind of on my Phil Jackson kick. I'm just kind of tired of hearing about Jerry Krause. And it's only because I knew all of this backstory before the documentary came out. And so to me, I could see how if I didn't know about it, it'd be like, oh, whoa, this was like a force I didn't even know about when I was a kid. As a kid, you're like, show me highlights, show me the game, and maybe I'll watch an interview. But I'm not like, I don't care about the GM. But then now when I got older, when I was coaching more semi full time, I read a couple of books on management and coaching and Phil Jackson, and there's a book about the Phil Jackson and Jerry Krause's relationship. So to me, it's like, all right, we get it. No one likes this guy, but he's sort of holding things together organizationally. And, that to me is one thing that I would say there's just been too much of. But again, I think it's important to add context because him drawing a line in the sand in so many different ways made it The Last Dance. Phil Jackson's not going to be the coach,
Yeah, you can't get into that story without
Yeah.
sort of setting the table with Krause's relationship with Phil and Michael and everybody. But
Yeah.
I didn't know that it was as sour as early as it was.
Whew.
Like the 93 finals where he's making it his mission to just destroy Dan Marley.
Yep.
Because when Marley was coming out, Krause liked him as a prospect, and that was enough to piss Jordan off.
Yeah.
Now, again, this is the same guy who made up a post-game confrontation with LeBradford Smith to fuel himself. So it shouldn't be a big surprise, and it doesn't necessarily reflect on Krause, that aspect of it.
Right.
But I didn't know that early on that there was already that tension between Krause and MJ, and it kind of makes it surprising that he came back. It was a little tough to watch some of that where they're just dumping on a guy who's dead and can't defend himself.
Mm.
And I know they've used some of the old interviews and all that. And I'm not saying that he doesn't deserve some criticism for the way he handled some of this. But I also don't think that he has necessarily gotten the credit for building that team and making some of the moves that he made.
Yeah.
And I mean, there's always some amount of luck in all these things, good or bad. It's not just one person who makes it happen. But I do feel like historically, he doesn't get the respect that maybe he deserves like some of these other GMs do. And I mean, clearly part of that is just because of the relationships that soured with Phil and Michael and a bunch of other people around the organization.
Yeah.
But that was a little troubling to me as I watched it early, and it was sort of one of the things that I didn't really love. But the one thing that has been missing, well, two things that have been missing.
Okay.
One, I really need some more Oakley. I need some Charles Oakley in this thing.
Yeah.
And he's always an entertaining guy. I think he might have been in briefly early when they were going through like the early Bulls
Yeah,
years.
like one or two interviews. Yeah, because he was still on the team at that point. Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, he was on those Knicks teams that they went head to head with for so many years.
Yeah, and they didn't bring him back in for some reason. Yeah.
Yeah, and I would have loved to hear more from Oakley. And this one isn't as big of a surprise, but it is kind of notable, I think, that we haven't heard from his family other than his mom and his brother.
Yeah, his mom calls him Mr. Jordan. Did you notice that?
I didn't catch that.
She calls him Mr. Jordan. She doesn't call him Michael. She doesn't call him MJ. She calls him Mr. Jordan. There's a dynamic there that I guess that they are just trying to not scratch into too much, but
yeah,
I think that kind of might be why we're not seeing more of them because it's.
Well, I thought that was more because I mean, obviously he and his wife at the time are no longer together and have been divorced for a number of years.
Okay.
So I don't know if that was just sort of a situation where it's just like, nope, I just don't want to get into any. I'll talk about my dad. I'll talk about all that, but I don't want to get into any stuff. But I think it also does sort of help illustrate some of the sacrifices that he made to achieve the level of professional success that he had. I mean, all that comes at some form of a price. And it's pretty clear from watching the way he would train and practice and his mindset and all those types of things that family was a little further down the list than it might be for some other people.
Yeah.
Which is not a criticism coming from me. I just want to be clear, but
yeah,
it does sort of shed some light on, okay, well, maybe, there aren't these stories. They're not being interviewed. They're not talking about it because there's just not a whole lot to talk about because he wasn't there a whole lot.
Yeah.
I mean, when he was playing baseball and he's talking about hitting in the cage, going in like crazy early and then doing the team workout and hitting again and then playing a game and then hitting after the game, all these things. It's like, well, when was he going to go hop on his Zach Morris car phone and call home to Chicago and talk to everybody. So
Right.
it's been a little. I thought we might hear from some of them a little bit, especially in terms of more of the early years or the first part of the dynasty. But I understand maybe why they're not involved. But it's just that was something that would have been cool to see. But I understand why that's maybe not a big part of it.
Yeah. So before we wrap up tonight, I do want to. I have a bombshell to drop that I'm not going to drop tonight. I'm going to. This is what we call it.
Us.
This is what we call a tease. Yes. There is a television show because we're not doing Stream Team tonight because it was all Last Dance. So we'll Stream Team next week, obviously. There's a television show that you and I both enjoy, and it's losing me. It's still on the air, so it is not concluded. I'm giving you some hints here, and the audience some hints. It's still on the air. It is still putting out new episodes, but it's losing me. And I think that we need to talk about it.
We talked about Westworld last week, so I know it's not Westworld.
It's not Westworld. No, Westworld lost me halfway through the season. I was just like, yo, who was alive? Who was dead? Who was a I almost said a replicant. Who was a host?
Replicant, is that what was that show?
Minority Report. It's the movie with No, Replicant is no, it's not Minority Report. It's wait, which one is Replicant?
Which one's Cylon? That's what I'm thinking of.
The Battlestar Galactica.
Galactica, that's right. I never saw that, but
I've only seen like the first 20 minutes of episode 1, and I was like, yeah, these effects are just it's not doing it for me, dude. I mean, the cast is great. I actually love Edward James Olmos, Katie Safri, but nah, it's just like, I can't suspend disbelief on this, like looking like mid 90s cable TV effects, even though it came out like in the mid aughts. I'm like, nah, dude, I'm sorry. I can't do it. I get it. The budget's hard. It's hard. Budgets are hard.
Well, I can't figure out what your show is. I'm going to have to. Don't tell me in the green room.
I'm not going to tell you in the green room. No, because
figure this out.
Because here's the thing: you're going to figure it out. You're going to figure it out. Well, I'm not going to tell you when it airs, because that would be too much of a giveaway. But if you haven't figured it out already, that means that you either haven't watched, or you're going to watch, or you're going to catch up. That's all I can say. But it lost me, and we need to talk about it. And I know we're going to get some heat for this. We might get canceled. That's a new thing, I think. But actually, from what I hear, getting canceled is a good thing now, because it kind of gives you some what is that? Clout, gives you notoriety online. So we'll get a lot of Twitter followers that will then unfollow us. That's what getting canceled is.
That's not what we want.
Well, I mean, but at least
we want to get picked up. We want to get renewed.
Okay, so let's get our pilot off the ground, and then get canceled after 5 seasons.
Well, before we get canceled, let's wrap up our Last Dance breakdown.
Yes.
Who do you think the big winners, and or if there are any losers, who the losers might be through 8 episodes?
I think from the narrative perspective, I've never been a big Pistons person, the historical bruisers Pistons.
The bad boys, if you will.
That's what it is. That's what I meant to say. Sorry. But again, I think it's easy to paint them as like, oh, the villains. So to me, they kind of came off as like, I'm sure they went up and were like, hey, Bill Laimbeer, like, you're still involved in basketball. He coaches in the WNBA. They were like, hey, Bill Laimbeer, like, you want to get the interview? And like, I'm sure he was like, no, you guys just make me look like an asshole. Like, I'm sure he was like, no, I'm not doing that. Because I mean, he was a big part of that image. Isaiah, of course, you put a camera in front of Isaiah, that's not hard at all. You and I can get an interview with Isaiah Thomas. We're like, oh yeah, you guys doing a show? Yeah, I'll come on. This guy's on TV 24 hours a day on the NBA Network.
Marcus, can you reach out to Isaiah, please?
What am I going to talk to? Like, I love when they do these things on when I used to have access to NBA Network. They would do these like evening shows where they'd have like a round table of like Shaq, Isaiah, like a bunch of like really like iconic people in the game. And I would always, every time I saw it, I'd be like, why is Isaiah Thomas here? Nobody wants to hear from him.
Well, he was a great player.
I understand.
He's done some terrible things since. I mean, he ran the CBA into the ground, ran the Knicks into the ground. There was a bunch of sexual misconduct.
There was allegations, yeah.
Yeah, some pretty serious ones.
But it's to me, it's actually totally his personality. Like, I really just don't like the guy. And again, it's not because I don't think he's a good person, and he's obviously was a great player. The way he presents himself, I'm like, dude, why are you so smug? I just don't get it. Like,
well, obviously, I met the criteria to be on the dream team.
it's like, I mean, and again, I don't know what that means. I don't know what the dream. Like, I thought that was just more of like a coach's thing, But again, I don't know how it works in the Olympics. But I'm looking at it, I'm like, yeah. So that being said, no, obviously a great player. What did MJ say? I think he said he's the greatest point guard.
Or he's right below Matt. Like Matt, you got
below Magic.
He's right there.
Yeah,
and he's right. And that whole story is fascinating to me still, and I don't know quite what to believe because I've heard a couple different variations of the story they told in the doc, and
I know.
I don't know. I think there could be a little. Well, he's maybe technically telling the truth, but not really. It's like, I didn't say I wouldn't play if Isaiah played, but that doesn't mean he didn't say I don't want Isaiah to play. Like,
right? Yeah.
There were a few statements that people made that seemed like they were couched very specifically.
Yes.
But I will say that whole, and this is one of my losers thus far.
Yes.
Is this idea, and it tends to come up a lot on the shows that you were talking about on NBA TV or TNT, where it's like, well, back in my day, we were, these guys are soft, they're resting, we didn't do that. It's like, yeah, you just didn't like someone, so you tried to keep him off the dream team, but because of a personal grudge. But yeah, you guys were super tough and weren't like these modern soft guys at all. So I feel like it's hurt that argument a little bit, where you see, oh, well, people have always kind of been this way. That's okay. But to me, obviously, Jordan is a huge winner in all this.
Yes.
Because there's a lot of people that are digesting this and seeing a lot of the stuff for, if not the first time, certainly in the greatest amount of detail and breadth and depth that they've ever gotten. And it does seem like there's been a little bit of a renaissance of appreciating Jordan and just how incredible he was. Because just like anything else, once you've been out of the game for a little bit, those memories start to fade. And you got a little recency bias with your LeBrons, your Kobe's, your guys like that. And I don't think it's ever really been disputed that by most people that Jordan's the greatest player, especially in our current climate, despite the occasional Jordan, LeBron, first take debate type of things. But I do think it's given a renewed sense of just how incredible and what a force of nature that guy was. And I've got a winner who was only briefly in the documentary, and it's not about him at all, really, except for one section.
Okay.
I think Kobe's kind of a winner in this.
Dude, I was shook. I was shook.
Because not only was it eerie, but also incredibly awesome to see his interview and talking about the All-Star game in '98, and basically said, look, what I did, I got from him. Without Jordan, I don't get to the level that I got to. I don't do the things that I did. So not only was that really cool to see that and just to see Kobe again, but getting into some of the teammate stuff and the way Jordan treated his teammates, I feel like Kobe did some similar things and in the moment got a lot more heat than Jordan did for being a bad teammate. Now, there were a couple times where he did I'm going to make a point of not shooting to make a statement or to prove my point to my guys. But if you look at a lot of the things he did and the way he talked to guys and the way he challenged people and all those types of things, it was really pretty similar to a lot of the stuff that Jordan did. And the
Yeah.
the narrative, the focus, the sort of prevailing opinion was that Kobe wasn't a great teammate, or at least a lot of people seem to feel that way. And getting a little more context with Jordan and what he did and how that was received then and now by his teammates. And I think now over the next couple of years, as we start to get a little distance from Kobe's passing and his career, and whenever inevitably the big Kobe documentary happens,
Yeah.
A lot of people's tunes will change with how they approach that aspect of his career and his personality. So even though it's not about him, just by everybody getting on board and sort of realizing with MJ why he did what he did and rationalizing it, accepting it, whatever you want to use. I mean, it seems like for the most part, people are like, yeah, well, he might have been a jackass, but he did it for a good reason. He wasn't a bad guy. He was just maybe hard to play with sometimes or be around just because of his just nonstop competitiveness. And with Kobe being the same way, I do think that he'll be viewed a little kinder in the lens of history because of it.
Yeah, that's a good point. Man, that one took me by surprise. That whole him being in it, it was so surreal, dude. Seeing him talk, like I was like, it was rough, man. I wasn't ready for that. I knew they were going to feature old clips of him when he was younger, but they had to have shot this in the past, those interviews in the past year or two. And
yeah, I mean, they've been working on this for like 3 or 4 or 5 years, I think.
oh
Like
my
it's been
gosh,
a while, so I don't know when they did which interview or any of that, but and I thought there was a good chance that we would hear from him at some point in this
yeah,
going in. But it was definitely cool to see him reflecting on his relationship with Jordan.
yeah, which they kept a secret. I mean, come on, it's like such a
See, I respect that though.
yeah. No, I think it's great.
I feel like too often guys make a show of, oh yeah, I reached out to this guy, or we text and we talk about stuff. And a lot of times it just feels like that's more of to spin a story or to make
Yeah,
you think that they're working hard and all that type of thing. Where clearly with Kobe, which is really like, I want to know how to get the most out of myself and other people.
yeah,
And we've seen many times the Kobe fist pump and the faces he makes and the things that he would do. And there were a few times where in the moment I was like, he's just doing a Jordan impression.
ah,
But in hindsight, I mean, I think even he would have admitted that that was true up to a point because
yeah,
that was such a big influence for him. But it is cool to know that they seem to have a real relationship and it wasn't just, oh yeah, we texted that one time and he gave me some general platitudes about being a champion, and when it's convenient I'll drop that as a way to get a positive story. It did seem like it was a real, like there was some real love between
yeah,
the two. And even Jordan at Kobe's funeral, being
yeah,
emotional.
yeah,
And that's one of the things and part of the reason that I love the clip of him in the locker room so much. And they talk about it in the doc where it's like, look, the only emotion that we ever saw from MJ was anger and frustration. Like we didn't see that human side of him very much. And we saw him as Jordan, the player and the athlete and the leader, not, the person. And it's been interesting to sort of see that complex picture come together and how he kind of had to bifurcate himself in a way. But
yes,
I'm just going to be this assassin all day, every day during the season, and any of the personal stuff just gets behind closed doors type of thing.
yeah. Yeah, it's amazing. This is just incredible sports journalism that they've done. And we get to wrap it up this weekend. Boy, I can't wait. Boy, it's going to be good.
What of what you think we're going to see or expect to see are you most excited about on Sunday?
Um, what I'm most interested in is so you have a team that has a chance to do something that in their era had not been done, which is these multiple three-peats. And I want to see how they handle it in a day-to-day fashion. because what we see is, as when we were watching it growing up, we see highlights, we see the game, and it's like, all right, it's just the athletes playing. But what do you talk about on the bus? What do you on the way to that game in Utah? How do you approach that? You're about to do something unbelievable. It might be your last time playing with any of these guys ever again, because it's the last dance. And so that's what I want to see. I mean, we've seen great behind the scenes. We've seen great funny clips. We talked about Seinfeld last week. We talked about all the funny anecdotes that have happened. But now it's like we're getting down to the actual last dance, the last song of the last dance. So that's what I'm really, really curious to see. What about you?
I'm excited for the flu game.
Oh, I forgot about the flu game.
And getting some stories behind that. And I'm also really excited for the inevitable someone saying that he pushed off on Brian Russell, and then them cutting to Jordan watching that clip on the iPad and reacting to it, and just burning whoever says it to the ground. I'm excited for that. I'm less questioning if it's going to happen and more who's going to say
it. Jordan, those memes with Jordan with the iPad. I mean, gosh, it's weird. I've never in my life ever said to I went to Carolina and I love UNC basketball. So did you. I mean,
that was right.
I was going to say you went to UNC. I don't know if you love UNC basketball, but like Jordan has been such a big part of like my sporting fan life. And I've never in my life been like, yeah, I kind of would love to like hang out with Michael Jordan and like drink a beer and get a cigar. And like, dude, watching his reaction to those iPad clips, though, I'm like, this dude just kind of seems like a fun guy. Like, he just kind of like, I really would like to just to see him in the flesh and be like what do you find funny, dude? Because like he's always been this ice cold, like super professional. I'm doing my McDonald's commercial. I'm doing my Gatorade commercial. Like I did Space Jam, but like that was at that time was one of the biggest movies ever made, and it's like, it's a sort of a comedy, but it's like, it's a Michael Jordan comedy. Like it's a commercial. Like I want to see like Michael Jordan, like when they get like some real like raw reactions from him from when they hand him the iPad. It's like, they really like, I'm like, dude, are you fun? Like, I want to know. Like, so
I was never a huge Jordan guy.
Yeah.
Growing up. And actually, like, especially in that second run.
Right.
I rooted for the Western Conference teams in the finals. Now, part of that was just because them winning felt a little inevitable. And so rooting for somebody else made the games a little more exciting. But also, I mean, it was sort of multi-layered. I never had anything against Jordan personally, other than the fact that he went to North Carolina and I was raised a Duke fan. So that he wasn't high on my list because of that. He knocked the Hornets out of the playoffs. It felt like every year there for a while. I think at least twice in that later run they did. So I was never really like I always appreciated him and respected him and thought he was undeniably great, but I was never like, yes, Jordan win. Great shot by Jordan. The Bulls win. All right. That's great. Like that was never, ever me. And so I do have a little bit of a renewed and reinvigorated respect and appreciation for what he did, and being able to have a little distance from it and appreciate it for what it was has been nice. But he does seem a little looser.
Yes.
In a way, and they've reminded me a lot of each other in the way they approached things. But there's definitely some late career Tiger Woods vibes with MJ right now.
Absolutely.
Where the last couple of years, Tiger's really kind of loosened up. But I mean, for 2 straight decades, he was in that, I'm not here to make friends. I'm here to intimidate everybody. I'm here to kick everybody's ass. Not only do I want to beat you, I want to then step on your neck and grind my heel in and make it hurt. And you can't have it all. You can't have that singular focus, that commitment to winning, that dedication to being the greatest to ever do it. And then also be kind of, fun and lighthearted and make jokes and hang out. And they just don't fully go together. Now, you can have that drive and that focus and be nice and cordial and have your moments, but there's a reason Barkley's personality was the way his was and the way MJ's was. That just sort of fit how they approached everything. And that's not to imply that Charles didn't bust his ass and work hard, or Shaq or any of those guys, but it's just some guys have slightly different priorities. And I was talking about this with a buddy of mine the other day. He's like, you just don't realize how great like the 15th man on the end of the bench is, and about how everybody who plays a second in the NBA is probably like the greatest athlete to ever come from wherever it is that they come from, that anybody's ever seen. And people a quarter century later still tell stories about seeing them play in high school and stuff like that. But just that amount of focus and dedication and commitment that it takes to go from being a great athlete and on an NBA roster to being the best player ever, you have to cut some of that stuff out. Like there's a reason they get to that level, and it's because of what their priorities are day in, day out, all the time. And it wasn't holding press conferences and cracking jokes and palling around with people in the media. He wanted to show up and answer his questions and go back in the gym and work.
Yeah.
So sort of seeing him relax a little bit and crack some jokes and talk seriously about some of this stuff and get into the weeds on things that happened has really kind of shown a different side of him that I hadn't seen before, and I've loved it.
Yeah. Well, we'll get to find out the conclusion this weekend, and
I think they're going to beat the Jazz. It's just a hunch. Don't spoil it. Don't tell me.
It's a stone cold lead pipe lock here. You didn't know this was a gambling show, but it's a stone cold lead pipe lock. Take the Bulls take the over. That's coming here from Richard Bruce Abernathy.
You saying take the over reminded me of something.
What's that?
I'd written it down on my notes and I forgot to bring it up. It's so fascinating when they pop up the scores from some of these playoff games, and it's like 84-73. And you just forget that towards the end of the 90s, it started to get into that kind of physical bully ball type of stuff.
Yeah.
That to me kind of culminated in the mid 2000s with that Spurs Pistons 7-game finals.
Yes.
It seemed like every game was 82-79 or something. And it's just been weird in a day where pretty much everybody scores over 100 points every game.
Yeah.
To see playoff games where neither team gets out of the 80s has just been a little bit of a trip down memory lane, and I'd kind of forgotten about that.
So we're taking. Well, so no, we're gonna change it. We're gonna take the under on the Jazz Bulls. Well, we're looking forward to the conclusion of a big sports event. Now that sports are kind of sidelined,
it's a good way to say it.
We'll obviously be wrapping it up during our Stream Team segment next week, and we'll be talking about the show that's losing me. That's not The Last Dance. There's your only hint. It's not The Last Dance. Last Dance has got me. I'm locked in. But we'll talk about the show that's losing me. A couple of reminders here. Obviously, you can find us on Twitter at The Word Podcast. So feel free to follow us there for updates on the show. I guess that our intern will be handling meme submissions at some point, or creation and submission and posting. I guess you don't submit things to Twitter, you post them. Obviously, you can listen to the show on iTunes, Spotify, and Spreaker. And coming up this week, Google Play. We have to we've been on Google Play before, but we have to reconnect.
We're just taking over the internet right now.
We're going to be on every platform imaginable. Oh, actually, you can actually listen to us on YouTube as well. The Word Podcast is the YouTube channel. So we've got it all. And if you wouldn't mind, while you're there at either of these platforms, any of them, or multiple, if you feel so inclined, I don't know why you would, feel free to make sure that you subscribe to the podcast or to the specific platform that you happen to be ingesting it from, just so you don't miss an episode, because we do an episode every week.
And feel free to give us a 5-star review while you're there as well.
I think that would be a great idea. If you're listening to us on Spotify or iTunes or Spreaker or Google Play, then you can leave a review to let other people know.
If you think we've only earned 4 stars, go ahead and give us the 5th. We're good for it. We promise.
It's an IOU. It's like Dumb and Dumber. We'll get it to you. Don't worry about it. They're IOUs.
Good for every penny.
Okay, well, thank you for joining us on the Word Podcast this week. Make sure to join us next week for Richard Bruce Jackson Abernathy.
He is James Israel Kukoc Mundia. Thanks for listening.
We will see you next week.
Take care, everybody.